Well, I'll just leave it on.
Yeah,
I'll leave it here. Yeah. Where do you want to begin? You want me to tell you reminiscences of him, or what? You want to ask any questions first?
I remember there were a couple of stories that you told about your days in Harvard.
Yeah,
when you went up with the car and the bubble gum.
Yeah, I'll tell you about that one. I happened to be talking to my sister Helen. I don't know if you've ever met her. You remember Helen? Just the other day, telling her that you would be coming over and the purpose of you coming over. And she told me a story that I had never heard of before that happened when Ruben was 2 years old.
Does Jason know about Helen?
I don't know if Jason really knows.
Who Helen?
Well, I was thinking actually of making it down there also.
Helen was Ruben's and my sister. Helen, she has 3 children, yes. And she lives in Philadelphia. In fact, that letter I sent you a couple of years ago in response to your letter, when I gave a quick rundown on the whole family, I mentioned our sister Helen and her children and so forth. Anyway, that's not important to this story. Anyway, the point is that she reminded me of this story. Not reminded me, told me, because I had never heard it before. Because for one thing, it happened before I was born. Ruben was 2 years old at the time. And the significance of the story, the interest in the story, is that it was a foretaste of what was to come in terms of the kind of person he was and some of his traits. We also had a sister, Belle, who was a few years older. She died many years ago. Helen must have been about 7 and Belle was about 10 at the time, and they were babysitting Ruben, who was 2 years old at the time. So the time came to put the kid to bed, and he absolutely refused. They couldn't, he positively refused. He wouldn't listen to them, and he kept saying, "Mommy didn't say so." He refused to take orders from his older sisters because when Mommy left, your great-grandmother, she hadn't said, "Go to bed when they say so." And he was literal, he was stubborn, and single-minded, which characteristics were very, very prevalent throughout his whole life. Anyway, that's the earliest story, which even precedes me. Some of the earlier times, I remember him, we were very close, and we buddied together. We were only less than 3 years apart. And he was my mentor and everything. He taught me chess. We played chess. He was a very good chess player, by the way. I was mediocre, but my interest in it came from how a big brother is. Kid brothers always follow what their big brothers do. So I learned chess from him. When we were just kids, a lot younger than you are now, radio just came into existence. I'm talking the early 20s. Ruben was born in 1914. That means he was about 8 or 9 years old. I was born in 1917. Means I was about 5 or 6. And I remember building a crystal set radio. You took an oatmeal box and you wound wire around it. That became the inductance. And you got a little piece of galenium oxide, which was the crystal, the detector. And you got a piece of wire, which was a cat's whisker, and you found a little good spot in the thing where there was a little hole or crevice, and that became the detector. So all you needed was an inductance and a detector and a long hunk of wire for the antenna. And we built it, and the earliest programs that came on the air was KDKA from Pittsburgh, which broadcast I remember listening to the 1924 presidential convention, which went to 104 ballots, not like they had today where everybody's by acclamation. They had real conventions then. And the thing went on for weeks, and the whole thing was being broadcast. Well, the point I'm making is that Ruben built the crystal radio, and I played with it, and I learned a little by following his lead.
Built a radio?
Well, a crystal set.
He just told you that.
Yeah.
That was a radio. That was a radio receiver with an oatmeal box with wire around it and little galenium lead crystal. You could listen to the radio. That was before the kind of radios you have today.
It wasn't exactly a Walkman, but...
Exactly. It wasn't a Walkman, no. And it wasn't a big set. And of course, we had many other kinds of radios after that, but Ruben always was interested in that sort. In fact, the most significant thing, one of the more significant things about Ruben is that he had a devouring interest in everything. He read everything there was to read. In fact, I always remember ringing in my ears, an injunction from my mother. When I was a teenager and I liked to go out with girls, Reuben was reading a book, and my mother always said, well, why don't you stay home and read a book like your brother Reuben? I must have heard that 100 times. Anyway.
Why don't you go out with girls like your brother Herman?
No, I didn't say that. This thing, I assume, is recording.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, you got the red.
Yeah, the red line
Yeah, it
on?
should flash.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, so I didn't follow him in all things because I didn't read books like he read books. But he used to have philosophic discussions on all kinds of subjects. He was extremely knowledgeable, and he had an insatiable appetite for knowledge. Of course, as I told you, and as you probably heard, he was very observant, very orthodox. He was more orthodox than my father. In fact, occasionally my mother and father would complain of something about Reuben's extreme orthodoxy. He was a little too much even for them.
What prompted him to that?
You can never tell.
Was it the fact that Grandpa, your father,
Well,
had
it
to work on shop?
had to,
Was there a point where Grandpa had to work on shop?
never.
No.
Never.
Some-
No.
I heard something.
No. That's impossible.
Mhm.
No. No, you got that wrong. In any case, he got the feeling for orthodoxy from my father, who was very
Go
fluent,
a step further.
and just it appealed to something in his makeup, which I think, now that I think about it for the first time, my father, your grandfather, your great-grandfather, his orthodoxy came from Europe. He was a yeshiva boy in Hungary, and he did it because it was the thing to do. Reuben was a thinker. He didn't do it just because it was the thing to do. He did it because he observed it, and he thought a great deal about it. He saw something in it intellectually as well as spiritually.
Because Grandpa was, I think Reuben was named after one of his rebbes.
No, Reuben was my father's father.
Right,
My
but
father's
Eliezer.
father. Eliezer was the Rebbe.
Rebbe, right.
So he
And
combined.
this Eliezer, in fact, I think was the great-grandson of a very famous Hassan
Hassan
Sofer.
Sofer, yes, that is correct. Yeah,
Right.
who was a great Hungarian sage.
Right.
Yeah.
Who, in fact, our custom of not eating milk after chicken and meat, we have 3 hours after chicken and
Right.
6 hours after meat. It's a very rare custom. It goes back to the
To Hassan Sofer, yes.
Hassan Sofer, right.
I know my father had an interest in the Hassan Sofer because once when we were in business, one of the buyers from one of the companies we did business with was Helen Sofer. And he wanted to find out from her whether she was descended from the Hassan Sofer because she had no idea. She didn't even know what he was talking about. But she probably was descended from the Hassan Sofer.
You said your family was in business, what business?
Well, my father was originally in the 20s, he was in the handkerchief business. If I go back even further than that to the teens and before that, he came over in early 1900s. By the way, I have, there's a, listen, here, what might be of interest to you. Have you ever seen this before? This is a copy of Grandpa Gross's naturalization certificate, 1905.
I've seen pictures. He was
Yeah.
dashing.
Oh,
Yeah.
handsome
Whoa.
man. That mustache.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Avery has that picture.
Yeah,
Unbelievable.
Yeah. Anyway, here he is. Anyways, after this, he went into the fur business after he had been recently married, and then he went into the handkerchief business. We moved to Staten Island in 1920. I was 3. Reuben was 6.
From where?
From the Bronx. We were born in the Bronx, Kelly Street, or East 170th Street. I don't remember where I was born, but one of the two, which is right now a jungle. It's the worst part of the world to be in, worse than Bangladesh, I think. And then we moved in the 20s, and Pop opened a handkerchief factory on Monroe Avenue. The building is still there, by the way. It's been I was there recently. It's converted into apartments.
Monroe and Staten Island?
On Staten Island, yeah. Right down near the ferry in St. George. In fact, across the street was PS 16, where we both went to school, and I used to cross the street to the factory where Mom would make my lunch. And
And you're living on Victory Boulevard?
we were living in 175 Castleton Avenue.
Right.
But I took the trolley car down to PS 16 8 cents at the time. I remember the name of the president of the things you remember, the things you forget. The president of the trolley company was Samuel H. Serena. His name was printed on every school ticket. We had school tickets, which were cheaper than the 8 cents that other laymen had to pay. Anyway, getting back to Reuben. He
You didn't finish answering
On the handkerchief.
Andy.
The
Well,
company.
he went into the handkerchief business, and then that failed with the Depression, like everything else. Not too many people today remember the Depression from first hand. You read about it, but it's impossible to really know how really bad it was.
First of all, there were no safety nets.
No, there was no Social Security, no unemployment insurance. If you were out of a job, you could starve. Unless you could make a couple of dollars selling apples on the street corner, which they did. The bread lines, they were social service agencies, private ones like churches and so forth, that gave food, and there were long bread lines, and that was the only way you could survive. I remember when it hit, Pop's handkerchief business went under, and he opened an office in our basement and got some lines of gloves to sell, work gloves. And then he opened up a one-room office in Lower Manhattan on 320 Broadway, 467 Broadway. Moved to 320 Broadway much later. That was only 2 rooms in the office.
Yeah.
First office had 1 room,
But I knew you.
and 1 secretary, Frida Sawada, who's still alive, I think, who was a folder in his handkerchief factory. She came to work as a girl of 16, and when that business folded, he went into the glove business. He took Frida with him, and Frida stayed with him for decades. In fact, she was there
Till he died.
long after he died, because she was with me. That gets ahead of the story, and I'm really not talking about Reuben that much, but this is all part of the overall picture. So I have lots of cassettes. I got a whole stack of them there. So if we're here, I can fill up the 3 cassettes without any story. Okay?
That's a gross talent.
You mean to talk?
Right.
Yeah. Anyway,
Stop him with the purse.
then he went into the glove business and really struggled. And he always walked bent over. And I think I mentioned this in my letter to you, because the heavy sample cases, when you're carrying sample cases with leather work gloves, it's pretty hard just to pick it up, let alone walk with it. And a dozen gloves then sold. I happen to know the prices because I worked for him for 6 months. I got out of college. I got out of high school in February '33, and I didn't start college until September, so I had 6 months there. I was only 15 at the time, and I was too young to go to college. So I worked for Pop for 6 months selling work gloves, and I remember my first order. But I know that a dozen leather palms cost $1. A dozen gloves for $1. I could tell you a lot of stories about what things cost. The New York Times was a penny, and the Sunday Times was a nickel, and so forth. You probably read stories about that. The only trouble is nobody had a nickel. When I went to college, I went to CCNY, and I got on a ferry boat. Instead of paying, well, it was already 2 cents then. Instead of paying 2 cents for a New York Times, I would wait until I got off and pick up a paper that someone else had dropped. That way you could save 2 cents. Yeah, 2 cents was important. Anyway, getting back to the answer to your question, when things started to pick up a little in the 30s, he started to sell knitted gloves as well as work gloves, always just eking out a living. But I mean eking out a living. As a matter of fact, I just yesterday came across a letter that my mother had written to me when I was at the Harvard Law School in 1939. I wanted to buy a used car. I needed $50 to buy a 37 Chevy. And I wrote her and asked for $50. In the letter, which I just came upon yesterday, it said a copy to my son. Said, how can I ask your father for $50? As you know, he's got Reuben on the payroll now. And you know what that means. And then she went on with some business advice. This is typical Grandma. She said, offer him 25. And I'll send you the 25. She couldn't say no, but she wasn't going to give me the 50. And if you have to, go up another $10 and I'll send you that too. 1939. Yeah, I have the letter right here. I'll make a copy for you.
She wouldn't give you the whole 35 at once.
No, I had to dish it out.
Installments.
I don't remember what I paid for the car, but I do remember owning it. I drove it for years.
Really?
In fact, we drove it to Texas.
That's the car?
That's the car. My 37 Chevy. Had a rumble seat. I used to drive back and forth to Cambridge in it after I bought it. And
No,
I would
the
have-
one we
Maximum
drove to Texas was not the rumble car. It was the next one.
no, we bought the olds in San Diego.
Not the old.
Well, could be.
The
Anyway,
rumble seat was pre the car we drove.
it's hard to remember
What was the
because
maximum
the car. Here's a
I think
story
that
that.
was a 34.
No, no, it was a 37 Chevy. Anyway, here's where a story that involved Reuben would be of interest to you, because the car I had before that was a 33 Whippet. You never heard of a Whippet, but it was made by Willys Overland, which you never heard of either. But my father had a Willys Knight. His first car was a Buick, a 1922 Buick, which was a touring car, which meant no windows. If it rained, you had isinglass curtains to snap on the sides in case it rained. And the regular Sunday procedure was to take the 4 kids, the 2 girls, Belle and Helen, and Reuben and me, out for a Sunday drive. And we had a lot of interesting experiences. The one that I remember most is the fact that my father always smoked a cigar. You remember,
I've
Chain
smelling.
smoke.
always, he chain smoked cigars. And in fact, his toughest day was Shabbos, because he couldn't wait till Havdalah when he could light up a cigar. As a result, he would smoke the cigar while we were driving. Well, it only took about 2 blocks before I had to ask the car to be stopped and would throw up.
Oh, really?
Which I'm very grateful to him to this day, because I never smoked as a result of that. So that'll cure you. If you want to cure your kids from smoking, just smoke a cigar in a closed room. Get them good and sick. When they turn green, you know you've succeeded. Then that's called
Learning by doing.
no, that's some kind of conditioning behavior.
Negative reinforcement.
Well, it's something by anyway. Another time I remember, we were driving on Bay Street. You remember Staten Island? Bay Street. They didn't have overpasses in those days. The train crossed and there was ding, 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 ding.
Right.
The gates would come down. And my father was driving. The family of 6 were sitting in the 1922 touring car, and he stalled right
Oh my God.
on the tracks. The gatekeeper was frantic. He didn't want to lower the gate. He lowered the one behind us, but didn't lower the one in front of us. And we hear the train coming. They had locomotives.
Yeah.
They weren't electric cars. Locomotives. We hear it coming in the distance. There wasn't a sound that came out of anybody. We all sat petrified.
I can't understand why you sat.
Pop, to his great credit, never lost his cool. He calmly started the car up again, and we just chugged off the tracks, and he pulled over to the side of the road, and we all sighed a great deal of relief. I got such a vivid picture of that. Just to continue a bit on the car business, it was shortly after that we were sideswiped on Victory Boulevard, and he was knocked off the road. If he were a good driver, it wouldn't have happened, but we really cracked up the car badly. And he never drove a day after that, ever. Whenever he had to take a trip, a sales trip by car, which he did many times, he always had a driver. And who do you suppose took over the driving after that? Grandma.
Oh, really?
Yeah. No, not me.
Oh.
I was a tiny tot at the time.
I got Grandma at
No,
the wheel.
she drove for a while, and then
Yeah.
after that, oh, you had a, I guess she did. I remember she took over.
Maybe she did.
She did, she did.
I doubt
Well,
she ever had
you
a
you want to talk about driving without a license? I wrecked my father's car one time because it was parked out in front. I was 14 years old at the time, and there was nobody home. So what do? I get in the car and I drive. I had watched him drive. I knew how to do it.
Easy.
It was easy. So I drove up around Silver Lake.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm driving around that curvy road where I don't know if they still have it, but they had the low stone fence. Maybe they're still there.
Probably.
Of course, this is 60 years ago, more. And, of course, they were playing golf, so I'm watching them play golf. Next thing I know, I'm headed for the fence.
You
And
got a
of course-
hole in one.
Yeah. So instead, I lost control of the car, and I swerved badly and ended up driving straight into the fence. And I remember...
They still have
The
it. It's right near the
insurance,
reservoir.
That's right, that's right. Between the reservoir and the golf course. Sure. I could pick out the spot to this day. Anyway, I remember the insurance man coming to the door and saying, we're not going to pay on the claim because it was driven by an unlicensed driver, which is absolutely wrong. But they bluffed. They bluffed my father out of collecting on the insurance
Really?
by telling him they were going to report me, which was sheer nonsense. I also remember that I didn't catch hell, but I got such a silent treatment that I still remember this day. Anyway, talking about Reuben and cars. The first car we had was this 33 Whippet. And the
How fast did it go? What was the maximum?
the Whippet?
Oh, sure.
Oh, Whippet could do about 50, 60 miles an hour.
Really?
Oh, yeah, it was a good car. We bought it for $10. There was only one problem. It didn't run. So Reuben, who could drive then, took my father's car and a rope, and we towed it home. And we went down to the library. This is a significant story because it tells you how he operated. No credit to me because I was just a kid brother who went along with whatever he did. I was too young to even know what to do next. And we went to the library, got a book on auto mechanics. We didn't know which end of the car was front. He got a book on auto mechanics. We read it. We took the car apart practically. We did an overhaul on the engine. We got the car running. And that car ran for 15,000 miles,
Right.
including a trip to Canada. And one of these days I'm going to find some pictures. I have pictures of that car and Reuben with it. And we took a piece of canvas and we made a tent. We went to state camping grounds. We had a little gasoline cook stove. We bought corn from farmers on the way. And we took a 2-week trip up to friends that he had from the yeshiva in Saint-Agathe-des-Monts. I even remember the name of the place. North of Montreal. It was summertime and they had a nice place. We went swimming and I remember the water was so cold in one of their lakes. We went down to Buffalo. We crossed into Buffalo and then came back across New York State and then down south. 2 weeks. We went several thousand miles. And, well, at least, anyway, whatever it was. And I then used the car. No, I'm getting mixed up with cars. I know we sold the car for $12. That's a 20% profit. It cost us
After
10.
15,000.
After 15,000 miles, we sold it for a 20% profit. I also remember that we used to take the pan off the crankcase cover, and it was a 4-cylinder car, and it was easy to repair. You could get to everything, not like the cars today, which no matter how good you are, if you don't have specialized tools and equipment, you can't even touch them. This car was easy to service, and we really learned by doing. And in fact, at Grandma's Beach at Arbutus, there was a water meter which consisted of, it was in a big hole underground with a couple of planks covering it. What we used to do is take the planks off, drive the car over it, and then use it as a pit. We could get work underneath the car. And we took the pan off. We did a ring job on it. We tightened the crankcase. One time on this trip to Canada, we were in Lake George on July 4th, and we pulled the car over to the side of the road to do to work out. It was making a lot of noise. We had to get underneath the car, and we took the pan off to tighten up on the connecting rod, the caps on the connecting rod. The cop comes along and says, "You got to get that car out of here in the next 15 minutes. There's a parade coming by." We did it. We put the car back together and poured the oil back in the crankcase. We're on our way in 15 minutes. That was the kind of stuff we did as kids. We look back on it with great pleasure because it was a nice way to grow up on Staten Island rather than in a city. Or there were no problems like kids have today, being tempted by drugs or any of the problems that when you let your kids go out in the street today.
Pure fun.
It was very rustic, very bucolic, very small townish. Everybody knew everyone else. You felt safe in the streets. It's very difficult to even conceive of times like that today. Anyway, more stories about Reuben.
The car got seized up at Harvard by the...
Oh, that's a different car.
Uh,
That's a different car. That was my '37 Chevy, which my mother helped me buy. Yeah, that's a great story. Also shows you how Reuben operates. Massachusetts was then certainly the first and only state to have a compulsory insurance law. And of course, insurance cost money. We didn't have any money, so we didn't have insurance. But you'd have your license revoked, your registration revoked if you drove in Massachusetts without insurance. Well, I'm trying to recall exactly how it happened. We had the car parked out in front of the place where the two of us roomed in Cambridge. He was his third year law student at the time, and I was a first-year student. And the cop comes by and gives me a parking ticket of some kind. And he asks for registration and insurance.
it was an Irish cop, wasn't it?
Officer Kelly.
Yeah.
Officer Kelly. Let me refresh my memory of exactly how it happened. I wasn't around at the time. He picks up Reuben and asks for the registration and insurance certificate. He doesn't have any insurance certificate. He says, "You can't drive this car." So they take the car, another cop drives it down with Reuben down to the Cambridge police station. Reuben goes into the desk sergeant, and they say, "You have to leave the car here until you get insurance." Also, he got a summons for driving without insurance and whatever else it was. And then Reuben had to find his way home. I think I'm a little bit mixed up. No, that's not how it happened. You know, this was a few years ago. That my memory surfing is just that things do fade. Now, I was the one that went down to the police station, but somehow or other the desk sergeant I can't remember exactly how it happened, had seen Reuben and knew Reuben. They took the car down to the police station. It was parked in front of the police station. And I had some books in the car, and I wanted the books. So I went down to the police station and went to the right, I got it now, yeah. Reuben had nothing to do with this. Nothing to do with it at all. It was all my doing except what follows, yeah. I was asked for registration and so forth, didn't have it. They took the car down to the police station. I rode down with it to do whatever I had to do before the desk sergeant. And then we're all standing in the police station, and the Officer Kelly had the keys. Now I remember it distinctly, sure. They're all coming back to me. He said, "You have to leave the car here." So I figured I'd take the trolley or bus back to Cambridge, back to where we were. And I asked him for the keys. I said, "I got to get my books out of the car." So he gives me the keys. I walk out of the police station. He's standing there on the steps. I get into the car, turn on the ignition, and drive away, which of course got him very, very mad. I drive back. I parked the car near the school, not where it normally was. And Reuben was in the library. Of course, while I'm doing these shenanigans, he's studying, naturally. So I find him in the law library, and I say, "Reuben, we're in trouble. Watch out." And I tell him what happened. And then I went back to the room. Reuben comes home. That's right. Reuben comes home. He's taking a shower. Officer Kelly barges in with another cop and grabs Reuben thinking he's the wise guy. I was the wise guy. Rube was the student. He grabs Reuben. He says, give me a chance to get dressed. He doesn't even give him a chance to get dressed. He throws some clothes on quickly. He's still wringing wet from the shower. He grabs him out of the shower. Reuben opened the door, and he was wet and so forth. He throws him into the police car, drags him down to the police station to put him under arrest for whatever reason. So he drags Reuben into the before the desk sergeant to book him. The sergeant had seen me. He sees Reuben. The sergeant says to Officer Kelly, "Officer, you got the wrong man." All this time, Reuben was protesting that he's got the wrong man. He says, "I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't do anything." He tells him, "You drove the car away." He says, "I don't even know what you're talking about." He thinks if the guy is a wise guy enough to drive the car away, he's obviously going to pull a story like that. Got to make sure this is still running. So he utterly disregarded his protestations. When the sergeant says, "You got the wrong man," then Officer Kelly knew he had made a mistake. It's a false arrest. And subject to a lot of civil liability that way. So he very politely drives Reuben back and says, just get your registration and we'll forget the whole thing. Well, Reuben wasn't forgetting the whole thing. Reuben was a great civil libertarian at the time. And we remember also, this was 39, and this was the time the Nazis were running roughshod over Europe, and the Jews were, it was after Kristallnacht, and the idea of violating of civil liberties here was a very touchy issue. And here's an Irish cop and a Jewish boy, so it had overtones of Nazism. If you want to look at it that way, it really didn't. Reuben went down to Boston, being a third-year law student, he knew his way around. We got the bluest blue blood law firm in Boston. In fact, the lawyer who represented us was named Faneuil Adams. Well, more New England than that you can't get. Adams is the descendant of the Adams family. Faneuil Hall is named after somebody, the family Faneuil, which goes back 200 years. So you can imagine how this guy's blood was really blue. He represented us. We brought an action for false arrest against the city of Cambridge and Officer Kelly. They tried to prevail upon us through their friends among the Harvard police, the Harvard cops, to forget the lawsuit, not forget what we did, and we should forget what they did. Reuben figured he had a good thing here. He wasn't forgetting anything. We went to trial. We sued them in federal district court. We have to have federal jurisdiction to get into the district court, a theory that we were citizens of New York, and we were suing the city of Cambridge. That gave us federal jurisdiction. We had a trial. We testified as to what happened. The question is, was the mistaken identity reasonable, justifiable? So I wore a sport jacket and combed my hair this way. Reuben wore a conservative dark suit and combed his hair that way. He put on glasses. I didn't wear glasses to make us look as different as possible. Although I guess anybody who knew us would know the difference. But maybe at a good, quick, casual look, especially if you're very, very angry, it's the kind of mistake you're likely to make. We got a verdict in our favor, meaning that they had committed a false arrest. But the damage, I think, was $1, some nominal sum, meaning that we really hadn't suffered any, we hadn't inconvenienced any. And of course, the charges against us were all forgotten anyhow.
Did you get 12 gloves?
Who, what?
Did you get 12 gloves?
For the $1.
Oh, yeah, well, that was a little bit, this was already a few years later. Anyhow, it made the newspapers, it made the news reports on the radio. Our folks were in Florida at the time, they used to spend time down there. They heard it on the radio, they had nothing about it. They said, what's going on here? My son's in court suing the city of Cambridge. So we told them what it was.
Wasn't there some story where there was a part of a good guy, bad guy, you and...
Oh yeah, in that story, sure. When the Harvard police tried to prevail upon us to gear up the suit, we said, let's step outside for a minute, and I forget who was the good guy and who was the bad guy. Let's say I was the good guy, it probably was. Yeah, that's how it happened, I remember now. We went outside the door, we closed the door, they were inside, And then we gave ourselves a signal like this, and I talked in a loud voice. I say, "Oh, come on, Rube, have a heart. Will you let him go? It doesn't do anything." And Rube would say in a loud voice, "No, darn it, I got my rights, and I'm going to stick up for him." So I go back in there and I threw my hands up. I can't do anything with him. That was just an extra little twist of the thing. I think my main reason for doing that is I still had a couple of years to go at Harvard, and he was leaving. So I didn't want to get in trouble
And you
with the
had
Harvard
no
police.
hesitation about, or Reuben had no hesitation about going for it, you know.
Oh, that was his hallmark. He loved to tilt windmills. He was always, in fact, in some of the material I have here for you, talks about how he was the champion of the underdog. Avery knows a story about how he, better than I do, because I think he was involved with it, a woman who didn't want to get dispossessed or by the World Trade Center, and how he fought for her.
I remember.
No fee. That's after my time, because I was in that much contact with Reuben at the time.
to Israel.
Give you an example, another example. I have a telephone pole back in the corner here, which is a utility pole. The telephone of the power company come in with their wires on there. You saw a radio antenna when you came in. Before this one...
It's coming out of your house. Looks like it's coming out of your house.
Well, no, the power's leading in. Anyway, I had a tower here, which much previously to this one, which had guy wires. It wasn't a freestanding tower. And one of the guys was attached to the telephone pole. Well, Lonnie comes along one day to service the wires on the pole, and the linesman refuses to climb it. It's unsafe because it's got a guy wire connected with it. So they write me a letter, and they say, an official letter from some bureaucrat in the company, saying, remove this obstruction within a few days, or we will not be able to service your pole. We will cut off your service. So I called Rube. He says, "Oh, they made a mistake. They can't do that. I have one of these days. I'll come across the file on that, and I'll send you that too." Well, he said in effect, he wrote him a letter and said, "I represent Herman Gross, to show right away that I'm not taking this lying down. I'm being represented by counsel." He said, "The pole is not your pole. The pole is Mr. Gross's pole, on the doctrine that once you put something, you attach it to the realty, it becomes part of the realty.
But you have to give them right away.
And they have an easement. But I own the pole. Therefore, on the other hand, of course, if I interfere with their easement, they may have a right." But he didn't say that. And I wasn't interfering with their easement. He said, "Furthermore, you threaten to cut off its power, the quality retention section so-and-so of the Public Service Law, which says that if you don't provide the power, except in emergencies, you're subject to a fine of $1,000 a day." I never heard another word from him. I left the cable on there until I no longer needed it, and that was the last of it. That was the kind of lawyer he was. He would always think of an angle that no other lawyer would think. You know, I think 99% of the lawyers are just routine journeymen. They know how to fill out a form, they know how to draw a contract. But if you have a real tough case, something that goes up on appeal, you have to be a thinking lawyer. You have to know what you're doing.
I found that, not being a lawyer, that in anything that requires them, it has to be my cunning and my maneuverability and my thinking.
Exactly.
And then I go to him and say, "Okay, now put this in a legal fashion."
Exactly right. Well, Reuben was the one who would think that up. In fact, many of the lawyers in Staten Island, who were what I call journeyman lawyers, would always come to him if the thing went on appeal, because then you had to really think. And they knew that he had a good legal mind and that he could think ways. Whatever the problem was, whether he was a plaintiff or a defendant, he would think of a way to win. And I remember there was one legend about him in the law school. He took administrative law from Frankfurter, who later became a Supreme Court judge, Felix Frankfurter. He taught at Harvard. I never had him because he left for the Supreme Court before I got to be an upperclassman. But Reuben had a class there. Frankfurter says, "What are the 3 reasons why such and such is so?" Reuben raises his hand, gives an answer, then Frankfurter smiles and says, Well, now, tell me, what are the 4 reasons? Now, that shows you the kind of mind he had. There were 3 obvious reasons, but Reuben never thought of the obvious. He always thought of the hidden one. And he immediately dismissed the 3 because anybody could think of those, but nobody could think of the 4th one. Now, that's typical. That shows you the kind of mind he had. And there's one little article there that I happened to find in the file, and there are many more that I'm going to send you when I find them, which show you the kind of mind he had. Always seeing what no one else could see. There's one, I don't know if you're familiar at all with the Bakke case. It was it was on television, in the paper just a day ago because it's the 10th anniversary of the Bakke case. That was the reverse discrimination case. Bakke was a white who wanted to go to medical school. He was deprived of his place because they favored a black who didn't have as good a marks as he did. And Bakke went to the Supreme Court and won on the case of that it was reverse discrimination. Reuben wrote a letter to the paper saying, "You all missed the whole point. This isn't a question of discrimination or reverse discrimination. No, it's just a letter to the article, a letter to the editor." He said, "Society is suffering." He says, "Because we became the country we are because we were basically a meritocracy. If you were good, you got to the top, and the country benefited from the fact that we had good men in the positions they earned. But if you're going to start doing reverse discrimination and deprive us of the better brains and the better talent, society will suffer." That was the decision that the Supreme Court should have based the decision on. The Supreme Court didn't even think of it, but Reuben thought of it. That's the kind of mind he had. You have the letter there. And I have, as I say, I'll dig out from time to time as I mess through my ancient papers, and I have files full of ancient papers, as you can see. That was the kind of, you'll see many other examples of that. I once came across a brilliant thing that he wrote on Roe versus Wade. That's the Supreme Court case on the right of states to allow abortions. And he wrote it as Roe versus Wade as overruling the case of Shylock, in Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice.
Which he was very fond of.
Brilliant article, brilliant. Showed an approach of mind. I sent a copy of that recently to my lawyer, who has a similar mind, also a Harvard man. Really appreciated it and said he wished he had known him because they would have been kindred spirits because they have the same turn of mind, which incidentally is why this guy is my lawyer. I had an ordinary lawyer who was no damn good for 35 years, and I didn't know what a good lawyer was like until I got this fellow who had the same kind of mind that Reuben had. Anyway, stop this for a minute because I want to get some notes. Okay.
Back on.
Okay. Rube went to City College Rube started City College when, let's see, I got out in 40, he got out in 38. So he started in 34. The very, very depths of the Depression. And there was just no money at all, period. And there was prestige in going to a pay university. He wanted to go to Columbia. But it cost, I think, $400 a year to go to Columbia. That was utterly out of consideration. There was no such thing. So he went to CCNY, and it was a good thing because in those days, CCNY was very intellectually stimulating. We had a fantastic faculty, an extraordinary student body. And there are men today like Irving Kristol, who you may have heard of, who were in that school at the same time, or a little later. The intellectual giants of the time for our faculty. It was a great school. Naturally, there was never any question that I would go to the same place, because whatever Reuben did, I followed in his footsteps. For example, when Reuben went to Harvard in 38, it was automatically assumed. Well, no one asked me, do you want to be a lawyer? Don't you want to be a lawyer? Reuben went to Harvard, you go to Harvard. So I followed him. So you can, his life very greatly influenced mine because I was always following in his footsteps, and there was never a question about it. Actually, I was a physics major, and he was a liberal arts major, and I would have loved to have gone to engineering school. But there were two reasons I didn't go. The first and most important reason is that Jews never went to engineering school because it was a given. And